It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all here. I flew in yesterday morning, and I got to experience, from a very limited perspective, the royalty that you guys enjoy every day. You probably don't appreciate it, but coming from the United States, we have literally no concept of what royalty is, and it's like everywhere here, and it's really cool to see. So that was a fun experience. My name is Joseph Maxwell, Joe Maxwell, whatever you want to call me. I answer to both. Let's see here if this is going to pull up. Postcards. Is that my postcards? Somebody else's postcards? Anyways, so I'll just run through it. I have come from the center of the United States. If you draw an X to the United States, you'll probably land somewhere within 100-kilometer radius, mile radius, I was going to say, but of where we live here in Kansas City. 3 kids, and I miss them, so that's why I'm looking forward to getting back home tomorrow. I've been working in Magento since 2011, Magento 2 for, 5 years. And I wrote a book called The Art of E-Commerce Debugging. Some of what I'm going to be talking about here today comes from that. I brought 4 copies with me. I don't know how I'm going to give them out, but I'll figure out some way. So if you really want to get better, just come up and talk to me, and I'll probably figure something like that out. Here's how a typical project goes from our perspective. We hear of this new project. We get assigned to it. We're really excited. We start writing code. We deliver the project, and 6 months down the road, thus the name of my talk, the merchant comes back to us and says, hey, we would like to make some modifications here. You're like, nice, let's do it. And then you get in the code, and it doesn't work quite so well. You're dealing with some bugs, and by the time you get this project done, you're literally 3 times over estimate. I've seen 10 times over estimate sometimes. There's plenty of bugs all over the place, and the merchant's not happy. You're not happy. And so what do we do today to prevent that problem from happening 6 months from now? There's a whole other conversation about when we are 6 months down the road and we've gotten screwed by us or somebody else, and what do we do? But what we're going to focus on today is how do we avoid these problems? It looks like I am throwing a curveball at them with my slideshow. So you can just go to the one that on the one that was sent to you guys a while ago.
Yes. What slide are you on?
I'll scroll through it. Just start at the beginning, because I actually forgot to say one thing. One thing we're doing real quick, a slight advertisement, but it's free, so it's not like pushing anything. SwiftAuto.com/survey. Starting, this is our second year now, we put out a developer report. Like, what's the state of developers? What do they think about Magento and their developer environment and all that stuff? And we're doing another survey. I'm trying to get 1,000 responses to get as big of a sample size as possible. We're going to be making all the information freely available that comes from that. So SwiftAuto.com/survey, that was one of the notes I forgot. Let's see here if this is... Sorry, I threw them a curveball, and we're see if we can get this pulled out here. There we go. Sweet, thank you. All right, so so the result is I sent them a PDF of it. This was the pumpkin blowing up, and then I don't know if you've seen the ads by Dr. Squatch. Yes, bugs aplenty. So we have problems. So what I'm going to be talking to you today is basically the software development life cycle, SDLC. From a very basic level. And you might tell me, Joseph, I'm not an architect. I don't want to be an architect. I love slinging code. That's what I want to do all day, every day. But my point is, as we learn to think like an architect, regardless of whether or not if that ever is your official title, you will be a better developer, and you will thank yourself in 6 months as a result. I am boiling it down to these 4 steps, and we're going to look at each one of these individually. Design, discover, develop, and document. Now, here's the problem. When we approach writing features, writing code, it ends up being about, I put down here, 75% or 66%, as far as the development phase. More like it's going to be 80 to 90% on the development, and then we're going to cram documentation, discovery, and design into the last 10%. And that's why we don't thank ourselves in 6 months, is because we don't do this proper planning. It should look more like this. It won't officially look like this, because development is probably still going to take the most of all 4 of these phases. But we need to spend careful consideration or time on each one of these phases. And when we do that, we will thank ourselves in 6 months. So discover, design, develop, and document. I come up with all these D words, and then you'll see in another one have another whole bunch of P words. That's just kind of how it fits in. So it's a stupid little cliche here, but I think this helps set the tone for what I'm talking about. Proper planning prevents prominent problems. Figure out whatever P words you want to put in there. But this really is this foundation what we're talking about. Now, 2 quick rules for software architecture, like the foundations for this. Again, going at this from a very basic level. Number 1, everything is a trade-off. No matter what we do, we could build the most secure application in the whole world, and at the end of the day, it's completely unusable. Nobody's going to use it because nobody can enter in all the credentials and criteria and take an hour to get through the login process, right? So everything is a trade-off. Or we could build something so ridiculously insecure, and everybody can use it super easy. Second aspect, and this is absolutely critical and probably one of the greatest mistakes that I often see in the audits, the code that I have reviewed, and one of the greatest mistakes I have made myself. You're going to hear that a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. The why is more important than the how. We do how all day, every day, right? That's writing code. We do how great. But why we do it is more important. As an example, we are doing a upgrade, just like I'm sure many of you, from 2.3 to 2.4. And this one project, there are 35 preferences. I forget the gentleman that just spoke in the last session, talked about the upgrade compatibility tools, a brilliant talk. And he talked about preferences, the ampersand tool. I sent that out to the team because I'm really excited about that. I had not heard of this before. Working through all those different preferences and basically the core hacks, the copied code, can be an absolute nightmare. Why, if you have to do a core hack, make sure you document, side note, why you did that core hack and exactly what was changed. I say core hack, i.e. a preference. In this talk here, I'm going to reference the Swift Auto Certifications training environment. That's a long set of words there. But basically, this is our version of sample data that we have made available. There's orders, there's products in there, there's everything that's available in there. We use this as the foundation for all of our training courses. So as you are, if you want to jump in there, it's a fully functioning. There's plenty of custom code. I'm sure there's plenty of bugs in there. You get in there, you can understand or have an opportunity to work with a live training environment. I also want to make things practical. So as we go through this, here is a very, very basic set of criteria for what I'm going to then apply through this conversation. A merchant wishes for notifications to be sent to an external API. I'm going to later refer to this as cart metrics. So this external API, cart metrics, when quote, order, or invoice totals are set or updated. It's kind of contrived, but this will help. We'll build this out in relation to this software development lifecycle that I'm going to talk about. All right, so these 4 steps, let's jump in and look at number 1, discovery. You say discovery, well, that's what the business analysts do when they're approaching a full build or something like that. No, I believe every single issue to one extent or another, it might be 30 minutes of discovery, even 10 minutes of discovery, every issue should have a evaluation done based off of the value that it brings to the overall project. So, number 1, discovery. What problem are we solving? Most basic thing. Now, if a bug, okay, yes, that's easy. We should have a fairly detailed understanding of what's happening here. Second, how do we know this feature is complete? Acceptance criteria. Does QA know exactly what they're working on? I've built out plenty of tickets that have had a really bad acceptance criteria. Another thing is, what is the potential fallout? Like, are we going to be upgrading the order database? And there's a million orders in there, and it's going to take 10 minutes or something of site downtime in order for it to make this change to the entire sales order table. So we have to be thinking about what impacts this will have, or is there a possibility this is going to have some big impacts on the production environment of one sort or another. Longevity, and this is an interesting problem that I've recently come across myself. Longevity is something I think this great developers have had as kind of whiplash. So great developers have seen lots of code, worked audits and et cetera, and at the end of the day, we've seen Band-Aids. And I was looking for a picture I could put up here of Band-Aids, literally 50 Band-Aids on the same problem. Like, we patch it from this direction, we patch it from that direction, and we're constantly fixing this problem, playing a game of whack-a-mole. And we don't want to be like that. So we always think of, okay, here is the problem, and then back here is the root problem. We fix the root problem. I talk a lot about that in the book. So here's how we fix the root problem. Well, at the end of the day, sometimes the root problem doesn't actually matter to merchants. And so it's a balancing act. There are some times where a short-term scenario is actually preferable to the merchant for one reason or another. How long does this need to last should be a question that we ask merchants about most decent-sized projects that we work on. In other words, can we also solve other problems with this functionality? So in other words, if we have a problem that maybe could have a 15-hour solution for, maybe we identify a 40-hour solution which is applicable in multiple contexts. And we present both of those options to the merchant to say, hey, 15 hours, 40 hours will save you time and money in the long run. So practically speaking, for discovery, we had our requirements we talked about earlier. What problem are we solving? Well, we're basically saying we're going to integrate with this API and its function. It's critical for reporting. Okay. So we have a very basic acceptance criteria. It should be built out a lot more than this, but just for space, that's what I do. What potential fallout? So what are the ramifications of implementing this? Well, we certainly don't want to be sending personally identifiable information, GDPR, etc. That could cause some real problems. In addition, as we're thinking this through, any type of API requests in the checkout could cause problems, and we'll see a potential solution for that later. Can we solve other problems? Well, we're not seeing any other value in making basically like an abstraction layer. So we could take this incoming information, build adapters, and then sending it out to multiple external sources. So we're going to literally build it for cart metrics right now. That would be the discover phase. Number 1, discover. Number 2 is design. So discover, design, develop, and document. These 4. I'm going to burn this into your head. You're going to remember this by the time you leave. Discover, design. Design is building a technical blueprint. And I don't know I hope everybody does this to one extent or another, but basically this is an architect sitting down and saying, how do I think this should be built out? You say, well, Joseph, but I don't want to be an architect. Fair, that's fine, but I can guarantee every technical blueprint has holes in it. It's not 100%. It's not, otherwise I guess they would be the developer. The architect would be, you are making decisions on your own as you work through this. However, let's talk about some of the design ramifications that we should be seeing in projects that are being built. The technical blueprint should have the service contracts and data interfaces built out, business logic, design patterns, and core features. We're going to kind of go through this list in reverse order because I like to talk about underutilized features a lot. The REST API should be used to transmit any type of JSON or any type of structured data, i.e. JSON, from the back end to the front end. I'm specifically talking about cases where there's headless or some variation of that. I've seen a lot of cases where the controller returns it returns JSON. And to me, that is a big code smell. The reason is the REST API is specifically designed for this. It allows you to return structured data. Structured data comes in, structured data is returned back. So in my opinion, this is just me, Joseph saying this here, it is a big code smell anytime I come into an application that I see JSON being sent out of a controller. So use the REST API. I have seen it clean up code bases significantly to use that. Service contracts, basically, does every class need to be against a service contract? By absolute, definitely no, but using those using those in correct cases can really help. Extension attributes. I have seen, it seems to be less, but I have seen those cases where the sales order table has extra columns added to it. We can use extension attributes to, we create a new table in DB schema. We can use extension attributes to pull those in and use those as an extra record or records to be associated with an order, for example. Or you can do it manually with plugins. Same thing. Extension attributes are really helpful because you can apply an ACL resource to them. So if you're, again, using the REST API, you can limit what data is being returned back with a specific entity. So ACL resources are able to work with that. RabbitMQ. I see this for some reason used very rarely, but RabbitMQ would be specifically what I would recommend using in this case of passing off this API information to the backend, where it doesn't need to be real time. Like, give it a few second delay. You're not hurting anything. But RabbitMQ operates in the background. Literally any type of business logic that is not immediately needed for this request that's being returned should be done, in my opinion, through RabbitMQ. XML configuration, we like to complain sometimes, maybe a little bit, about how Magento does this all the time, but there's a lot of value in using DI-XML for configuring stuff. Applying design patterns. So design patterns is something, again, we've seen Magento 2 really nicely adopt, and yet for some reason I don't think many of us developers have taken the time to deeply understand what these are to do and how to use them. I'm going to talk about 3. I wish I could talk about all of them. I love design patterns. The issue is time, so we're going to just focus on perhaps the top 3 that I don't see used very often, but are really easy to implement, and we can get a boost from our development just by using these. The first one is a custom factory. Now, I get a little bit of pushback on this because it's like, should we ever use Object Manager? And in this case, if you were to follow my advice, Object Manager will be found in app code. So if you do just a broad search through app code, and you have created a factory that uses Object Manager in app code, or you can use vendor install it, whatever, that could be viewed as a red flag, but in reality is not. So the case that I talk about here is, let's say we are using in PHP 8.1, we're using unified types, we're passing in an object. It could be a invoice, or an order, or a quote. We pass in this object to our factory and say, hey, we need an adapter, and I will be talking about that in here in a second. We need an adapter to pull the information from this quote, order, or invoice and make it into a unified format that we're going to send out to our API. The factory, which we see right here, basically accepts our incoming object, and with some constructor data, we obviously probably would not use it. It maps the type out and uses Object Manager to create that the instance of that object. This can be a very handy way to centralize the initialization logic and handle whatever custom functionality you need to happen there. Speaking of which, an adapter joins together 2 systems. Example that probably we just don't want to talk about too much would be the gateway command in payments, and how long and how convoluted that seems. But as you get into it, it's actually not that difficult to understand. Basically, what an adapter does is it takes there's an adapter for each one. It basically takes incoming data and puts it into a standardized format to work with other types of data. A composite. This is multiple functions that all fit into a common service contract. So in this case, I have a reference to the product decorator composite calculator. We have these different calculators. Each one of them has a different function for calculating the total for this product. And we iterate through each one of them a parent that actually matches that same the parent that matches the same interface, the same service contract, iterates through them, as you see right here. So we have a calculator interface. This parent is a calculator interface, and then it iterates through each one of the child calculators as well, and then returns the response out of that. So practically speaking, how would we design this? We have the cart metrics. The implements are, we would say, we have a new API destination for that. We have observers for quote, save, and order, which is going to listen to those save events. We have, and I keep trying to get this done, but I have a asynchronous event observer that pipes the events through RabbitMQ, and that would be perfect. And that's what I would be recommending. We would be doing internally for taking those from quote, order, invoice, and then we finally have the we have the factory to get those adapters, and we can continue on. We'll talk about actions here in a second, and services as well. So, number 3, discover, design, and develop. This is typically what we spend all our time doing, but I'm going to keep this as short as possible here. Oh, that's normally a GIF right there anyways. All right, so an action. An action is typically what a lot of us would call a service. And I'm weird probably, so forgive me on this one, but I don't like to use the term service in this type of a context. When we're building out applications or modules, we have an action for every single piece of business logic. Every action has one public method. The method name is execute. And the key point is to keep it small. Keep it as absolutely small as possible. If we find that we need to we have a private method in there and we're just like, oh man, I really want to make this public, that means it's a sign you got to pull it into an action. And it's really simple. But unfortunately, I'll call this out. I've seen a number of cases, well actually a lot of cases, where developers have maybe a little anxiety of creating a new class. We just got to get over that. It's okay to create new classes because ultimately, to an extent, the more smaller classes that we have, the more testable our code is. Writing testable code is an absolute pleasure to work with, and we will thank ourselves in 6 months. One big caveat, though, to actions. And unfortunately, I see this caveat being lived out in the Magento core code. As we see right here, I didn't pull the class name in, but this is in it's the MSI, the inventory admin, something like that, sales admin, I don't remember. So basically, it's the UI component that puts the saleable quantity into the product grid. It's notoriously slow. Why? Because they've adopted this idea of actions, right? They have a ton of classes in MSI that has the execute method, and yet what's happening is it is iterating through every single one of these products. 20 products, you might not notice it. 200 products, you definitely notice it on the product grid, listed all at once. Every single one of those queries, or that method there, that is called 5 queries per product. And that's expensive. That is very expensive, and that will slow down your admin right there. So the action classes can be very powerful, very good, but you want to keep in mind that you do not want to query within a loop. And that was the word I was looking for earlier. Query within a loop. We want to avoid that at all costs. In that case, use a resource model. I think I saw talk about resource models. So make sure you go and utilize resource models to their fullest. Service. So I look at services. Again, maybe I'm just weird here, but I look at services as a way to fetch data. So this could be pulling information out of the request, pulling it perhaps somewhat from the database, etc. Data fetching is where it goes into the services. Now, testing is, and I don't understand this. Maybe I'd be curious to talk to some of you afterwards. For some reason, in the e-commerce space, I find there to be very little testing. Peter, I think you've worked on, yes, he's sitting back there by the camera. They worked on some Cypress tests, which is really a really cool thing. But overall, like most developers that I talk to in this space literally don't test. No integration tests. I don't know how valuable unit tests would be in our case, but no integration tests and very little functional tests. And yet, is my experience that, again, how to thank ourselves, that testing is one of the best ways to reduce technical debt. In other words, every line of code, custom code that we write is technical debt. Testing is one of the best ways to reduce that number significantly, and it can reduce it very significantly. So if you haven't already, please consider getting into it. It takes a little bit of work to understand how to write integration tests. But the biggest hurdle, in my opinion, is what I just talked about for the last, 20 minutes or so. Literally, that's the biggest hurdle. Why? Because if we don't write testable code, it's literally impossible to test our code. We write small classes, testable classes, and that's what those actions were for. And one thing I forgot to say is that all business logic should go through one central place. You should never have duplicated business logic, ever. I've seen way too much of that type of duplication. A couple of things to note here. Writing tests is not that difficult. Just get in there and do it. Magento data fixture loads tests all automatically for you, or fixtures from that directory right there. It's super easy to do that. Again, testable code is easy to test. It sounds dumb, but it's true. Make sure you do it. I have examples in our the teaching module in this example project that I've sent out, or that I've shared with you all. So make sure to see it, because honestly, between writing testable code, then you just need a few examples, and you are on your way. It's not that difficult. I did a project here. I don't know. We did a really massive project recently. We had a big emphasis on testing. Went in at one point to refactor something that I did. I already written an integration test. Ran that integration test before I did it. Of course, it passed. Ran it after I did this refactor, and it passed. I was like, yes. Honestly, there needs to be much less QA if we are writing testable code. And the nice thing is tests should be run in CI/CD. So every single time, you know that functionality should work exactly as intended. So finally is document. And this is one of those areas that is very difficult for us as developers, me included. documentation is a matter of saying what we did. So type hint all the time. That should absolutely be part of this. PHP Storm is now starting to bring in generics, even though that's not in the actual core language itself. Learn how to do some of that. Of course, every method should be type hinted, and obviously to make it compatible with the Magento API, it should be type hinted. Ideally, we're writing some documentation on every public method, even if it's a sentence or two to say what we do. If you do use preferences, like I mentioned earlier, make sure to put exactly what you did in there. Like for me, if nothing else, just add a comment like Swift Otter added, and then ideally a line or two about what you did. Just a little bit of information can make all the difference in the world when it comes to an upgrade down the road. README files, and obviously add some information to Confluence. You will thank yourself in 6 months. We have implemented these features, what I've been talking about ourselves. It's made a huge difference for us. So again, discover, design, develop, and document. You're not going to look exactly like these percentages, but it's going to look pretty darn close, and you will thank yourself in 6 months. I'm happy to answer questions. Yes.
At what point would you factor in, estimation into this process? Would you do the heavy sort of technical design first and then estimate to the customer, or would it be before that?
That's the way we do it, yeah. So we have the discovery, make sure we get all the requirements, and then we do the design. At the design phase is when the architect then puts an estimate on it. Yes?
On the blueprint creation of the module, would you bring, or are you bringing in any other external resources from other departments or other areas of expertise in order to be able to create properly and develop that particular functionality?
Yes, at that point, yes. So the way we do it, just us personally, is, and I know this varies widely from company to company, but the way we do it is in the design phase, the architect is responsible for pulling all the information together. So if that means meetings with other people or departments, whatever, yes, then they are responsible for getting that. And the final output is to make sure that the technical blueprint is reasonable and they have now an estimate associated with this. Yes, again.
Who will use that technical blueprint besides the leading architect, or is there a second pair of eyes that gives out any opinions, or basically tells, I know an architect should be here.
Yeah.
Shouldn't tell anyone.
We don't have a process for that, but that's we haven't had issues with the second pair of eyes yet. But because ultimately, our architects know, if they need a second pair of eyes, they'll ask for it. So, but I could definitely see some value in 2 pairs of eyes, especially on the bigger stuff. Yeah. Yes.
How do you split things in terms of what you're putting into Confluence? Do you have technical stuff in there, or is that all just in the code? That's for the developers to look at, and Confluence is for business logic and such?
We put technical stuff in Confluence. It all gets dumped in there. Simply because this is just for us, but what we like to do is have a central place for all this information. So some can go in the code, and I'm not excluding the code, but we have there's a lot of code-related stuff that goes into Confluence as well. Wrong or different, but that's how we do it. Yeah. Yes.
Documenting-wise, do you find it valuable if you have old code, but you're reviewing it, but it's never been updated in regards to technical point of view and documentation for it? How do you handle that bit of process?
I would say what we do is incrementally. So there's been plenty of stuff, unfortunately, that we've worked on that has had very poor documentation. I hate to say it, but it's true. And so now that we have had a big documentation drive in the company, we've worked to, as we go back and we touch code in that area, we then try to document it out. Or if we have a update request or a problem in that area. And historically speaking, I hate to say it, it's been more of me that's done very poor with documentation over the past years. And so as I'm working to hand off those areas, That's where I get in, I write the documentation as details I possibly can, and then I'm able to hand it off. Because ultimately, again, documentation is, one thing I did not say there is thanking ourselves in 6 months is actually somebody else thanking you in 6 months, right? So somebody else knows how to get into this code, or at least has even a basic idea as far as how this works can make a huge difference. Yes?
So thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question regarding to RabbitMQ. You mentioned that we can use RabbitMQ for like passing information through the API instead of doing. Can you give guys an example of that, or a scenario?
In my opinion, almost any event observer can be run through RabbitMQ. So the idea is with a plugin, at least the way I understand and read the Magento code standards, plugins adjust functionality or adjust the flow of data as they go through the system, right? So it's kind of like middleware, if you will. With an event observer, the way I look at that is that we have an event, sales order place after, right? And so by virtue of that name, it could happen any time after this order has been placed. So by routing this, the way you have to do it is you create an observer and then you trigger, well then you would push it off through RabbitMQ. So basically you say, okay, here is my incoming order. I'm going to send this out to RabbitMQ, the consumer on the back end, which is a long-running process. Oh, I forgot to say something about that. I didn't have my notes up here. If you use RabbitMQ, the consumer is a long-running process. So it can run anywhere from 10 seconds to 5 minutes or however long you set it. That means your class variables don't recycle. Remember, so when you have you're creating a normal module, every one of you have a request, your class variables are initialized, cache, save, whatever you do with those, and then it's gone, right? That product is saved, it's gone. With RabbitMQ, that's not the case. That can run for 5, 10 minutes or however. So but it's not predictable, right? So that the consumer can start up, can shut down at any time it ever wants to. So you can get some very weird bugs when you improperly use class variable caching. So that will cause you a lot of challenges in that. So all that to say is that then those processes would happen then on RabbitMQ in the background. Oh, and the other thing is, sorry, I had one other thing. RabbitMQ is not a performance fix. And that sounds weird to say because I just recommended it. If you have performance problems, you have a slow product save and your index is all screwed up or something, the custom index or whatever, screwed up. It's not going to fix it by just moving to RabbitMQ. What will fix it is you fix the problem and then you move it into RabbitMQ. Then RabbitMQ is not a band-aid for a problem that needs to be fixed anyways. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Also, you mentioned right now, like you can put observers. Maybe I'm confused, but it say like you can put observers in the RabbitMQ as well. Or?
Yes, I was a little confusing when I said that. We have a tool that we've written that basically automates the RabbitMQ path. So all we have to do is instead of using the event manager interface, we've created a queue event manager interface. So basically, you pass the message to that, it just dispatches it through RabbitMQ. So otherwise, it's the same process for creating events, etc.
Do you recommend to put all the observers or just only the ones that are identified?
I mean, it depends on what you're wanting to do. If you can, I think following, in my opinion, ideal standards, observers should be able to happen at any point in the future. So with that thinking, then yes, you would be able to run anything through RabbitMQ any observer through RabbitMQ. That's an ideal. I don't think in practicality it would ever work like that.
Sorry, that's all the time we have for the questions. So if you have any further ones, feel free to reach Joseph afterwards and give a huge round of applause for Joseph.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.